fire on their fellow countrymen. These are the battles.
November 14th, 1942.
Affairs in the Pacific.
Following the naval victory at Midway,
The night sky over Iron Bottom Sound was almost fully dark. No moon, no lights, only the sound of engines and waves. The battleship USS Washington cut through the water toward Guadalcanal. For months, the Japanese Navy ruled these waters. Many American ships already lay on the bottom here. Most officers did not think much of Washington. They liked her sister ship, South Dakota, more. Washington was seen as the extra one, but in the next 13 minutes, this extra ship would do something almost perfect. She would use her new radar and big guns to destroy a Japanese battleship at night. She would prove that American battleships with radar could beat Japanese ships that had ruled the darkness. Make sure to subscribe for more World War II stories like this. USS Washington began her life with almost no excitement around her. She was the second battleship in the North Carolina class, and right from the start, she carried the weight of rushed design changes, political limits, and old officers who did not trust new ideas. For many years before she was built, the United States had been forced to stop battleship construction under international naval treaties. When those limits finally ended, the Navy tried to catch up fast. But catching up fast meant making hard choices, and Washington lived with all of them. Her hull was first designed to hold 12 14-inch guns. Then, U.S. intelligence said Japan might be building ships with much larger 16-inch guns. The Navy panicked. They redesigned the class to carry 9 16-inch guns instead. But they did not redesign the hull around them. This meant Washington carried huge weapons in a body that some officers said was too light and too thin for a real battle line ship. Many believed the design was good at many things, great at nothing. Her engines were powerful, over 120,000 horsepower, and could push her to 28 knots. That was fast for a battleship, almost as fast as some cruisers. But speed came with problems. During her shakedown cruise, parts broke often. A turbine blade snapped. Salt water leaked into the boilers. The new fire control computers, built by Ford Instruments, were so sensitive that they needed constant adjustments. Old Navy officers, who grew up with slow, heavy battleships, looked at Washington with doubt. She seemed too fast, too modern, and too dependent on new machines. Some joked she was a cruiser pretending to be a battleship. But when Pearl Harbor was attacked and 8 older battleships were sunk or damaged in one morning, the doubts no longer mattered. Washington and her sister ship South Dakota were suddenly the only modern American battleships ready for war. There was no more time for testing or debate. Washington was rushed into service, sent first to protect convoys in the Atlantic, then pushed through the Panama Canal into the Pacific, the place where she would finally prove what she could really do. Rear Admiral Lee was not a typical battleship leader. He was quiet, calm, and more interested in science than ceremony. He had won a gold medal in rifle shooting at the 1920 Olympics, and he spent much of his Navy career studying guns, ballistics, and fire control systems. Lee believed the future of sea battles would not be decided by eyesight or luck. He believed the future belonged to ships that could see in the dark using radar and hit targets through math and machines, not guesswork. Most older admirals did not agree. They trusted the old methods: long lines of battleships, visual spotting, searchlights, and rangefinders. They believed battleships should fight in daylight or under bright lights at night. They also believed radar was useful, but not something you could rely on alone. Many of them thought Lee was too focused on numbers and not enough on tradition. Washington carried the SG radar, one of the first real surface search radars that could spot ships far away in the dark. It sent out radio waves that bounced off enemy ships, and it showed their distance and bearing on a glowing screen. With this new tool, Washington could see long before the enemy could. Lee understood this better than anyone. To him, radar was not just equipment, it was a weapon. Lee believed fast battleships like Washington and South Dakota were made for a new type of mission. They could protect carriers with speed, they could fight alone at night using radar, and they could strike before the enemy even knew they were there. But this idea went against the old Navy mindset, which still pictured battleships trading shells at visible range. The Japanese had already proven they ruled the night around Guadalcanal. Their night glasses, training, and deadly long-lance torpedoes allowed them to hit American ships again and again. U.S. cruisers and destroyers kept walking into ambushes. Many American sailors feared the dark waters because the Japanese seemed almost invisible and deadly in every night battle. Lee looked at this and saw a simple truth. If the U.S. Navy did not learn to use radar the right way, they would lose many more ships. Washington was the tool he needed to prove it. The coming battle would not only test the crew, it would test a whole new way of fighting. The night of November 12th to 13th, 1942, was one of the most brutal sea fights of the entire war. A group of American cruisers and destroyers under Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan sailed straight into a Japanese force that planned to bombard Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The battle happened in almost full darkness. There were no clear lines, no steady formations, only shadows, gun flashes, and confused voices on the radios. The Americans had radar, but they did not use it in a solid, organized way. Many of the ships relied on eyesight and guesswork. The Japanese used bright searchlights and excellent night fighting skills to pick targets fast. Their long-lance torpedoes, which could travel far with no wake, slashed through the water unseen. Within minutes, American ships were hit, burning or sinking. 2 cruisers went down. Several destroyers followed. Many sailors never made it out of the water. The Japanese also took damage, but not enough to stop them. Their battleship Hiei was hit by many shells and slowed down, but she stayed afloat long enough for U.S. aircraft to finish her later. Even with Hiei lost, the Japanese command felt confident. They believed their night training and torpedoes still gave them control of these waters. They planned to send another group the next night, this time even stronger, led by the battleship Kirishima. If Kirishima reached Henderson Field and shelled it, the Marines on the island would face disaster. News of the previous night's losses spread fast. When Washington's crew heard the reports, they knew they were heading toward a place filled with wrecks and bodies. They knew the Japanese were skilled, bold, and dangerous at night. Many of the men had friends on the ships that were now lying on the seabed. The mood aboard Washington grew heavy. Every man understood they might be heading into a fight just as wild and deadly. But Washington had something the ships from the night before did not use well: a fully working SG radar system and an admiral who actually knew how to use it in combat. Admiral Lee believed radar could beat Japanese night tactics if used correctly. Washington was about to give him the chance to prove it. The ship moved forward into the dark water, heading toward a battle that would test every idea Lee had fought for. By 10:30 p.m. on November 14th, Task Force 64 moved into the waters north of Guadalcanal. The formation was simple: 4 destroyers in front, then USS Washington, and behind her, USS South Dakota. The night was almost lightless. No radios, no lamps. Every ship ran in silence to avoid giving away its position. The men could feel the tension growing by the minute. Inside Washington, Radar operators watched the SG radar screen as bright spots appeared on the scope. They showed enemy ships closing in fast from the northwest. The range dropped 30,000 yards, 28,000 yards, 26,000 yards. The Japanese were heading straight toward them. Admiral Lee had to decide whether to break radio silence and guide the destroyers more clearly, or keep quiet and protect the element of surprise. He chose silence, trusting his destroyer captains to respond once they made contact. But the Japanese saw the American destroyers first. Their crews were extremely skilled at night spotting. Without warning, Japanese destroyers launched their deadly long-lance torpedoes. These torpedoes had long range, moved fast, and left almost no weight. They were the most dangerous torpedoes in the world, and the Americans never saw them until impact. Waka took a massive hit and split apart. Preston was struck by gunfire and torpedoes, turning into a ball of flames. Benham's bow was blown off, leaving her barely afloat. Gwyn was also hit and badly damaged. In just a few minutes, the entire American destroyer screen was almost gone. The path ahead of Washington was now wide open, but it was also filled with wreckage, fires, and the screams of men in the water. Then, as if the situation needed to get worse, South Dakota suffered a sudden electrical failure. A breaker tripped, shutting down her radar, her radio, and her fire control systems. She could still move, but she was blind and unable to fight properly. She pushed on in the darkness, unaware of the disaster unfolding around her. The Japanese turned on their searchlights and caught South Dakota in the bright beams. Her gray hull glowed in the night. Dozens of Japanese guns, from battleships to destroyers, opened fire on her. Shells exploded around her. Hits tore into her upper works. Sparks, flames, and smoke surrounded her. But Washington stayed invisible. She was only 400 yards behind South Dakota, but the Japanese never saw her. The smoke, the chaos, and the angle of approach kept her hidden. The Japanese focused all their attention on South Dakota. They believed she was alone. They believed she was the only battleship in the fight. They were wrong. Washington was still in the dark, waiting for the moment to strike. At 11:17 p.m., Admiral Lee gave the order Washington had been waiting for. Open fire. The command traveled through the ship in seconds. Turrets swung, breeches locked. Powder bags and shells were loaded. A deep, heavy silence filled the fire control rooms as the crew waited for the final firing solution to appear on their screens. Then the night exploded. Washington's first full 9-gun salvo roared out. The shells were huge. Each one weighed more than a small car engine. The blast shook the entire ship and blew fire and smoke across the deck. Radar gave Washington perfect range to a Japanese cruiser. The first salvo fell close. The second salvo hit the target with crushing force, sending fire and debris into the air. Now Washington turned all of her attention to the main threat, the Japanese battleship Kirishima. She appeared clearly on radar at only 8,400 yards. That is extremely close for battleships. At this range, every hit could tear through thick armor like paper. Washington began firing salvo after salvo, about one every 30 seconds. Her fire control computers tracked Kirishima's position and speed, updating the aim constantly. The results were brutal. Shells smashed into Kirishima's forward areas, ripping through her superstructure and knocking out important stations. One shell tore straight through her armor and exploded deep inside the ship. Another shell damaged her steering gear so badly that her rudder jammed hard. Kirishima began to spin in a slow, helpless circle. Fires burned across her decks. Flooding grew inside her hull. Washington's secondary guns also joined the fight. The 5-inch guns fired at Japanese destroyers, lighting the area with star shells and hitting anything that came too close. Washington's guns worked like a machine. Even with explosions nearby, the loading crews kept up a smooth rhythm. Load, close, fire, repeat. The Japanese still believed South Dakota was their only battleship opponent. South Dakota was lit up by searchlights and being hit again and again by smaller caliber shells, but she was still afloat, and her armor kept her from being destroyed. Meanwhile, Washington stayed hidden in the darkness. No searchlight touched her. No gun aimed at her. She was a silent killer, unseen but deadly. Within minutes, Washington's radar-guided shooting began to overwhelm Kirishima. The accuracy shocked the Japanese. They had trained hard for night fighting, but they were not prepared for a battleship that could aim without seeing every American salvo landed closer and closer, hitting with incredible precision. In those 13 minutes, Washington showed what modern systems, good training, and calm leadership could do. She proved that radar was not just useful. It was a game-changing weapon that could decide the outcome of a fight before the enemy even understood what was happening. By 11:22 p.m., it was clear that Kirishima was in serious trouble. Washington's steady, radar-guided hits had done far more damage than the Japanese realized. At first, Kirishima's speed kept dropping. Her steering was destroyed. Her rudder was jammed so hard that the ship could only turn in one slow circle. Fires burned across her decks. Smoke poured from her superstructure. Deep inside the ship, water was rushing into damaged compartments faster than the crew could control it. From his flagship cruiser, Admiral Kondo tried to understand what was happening. He could see South Dakota brightly lit by searchlights. He knew South Dakota had been hit many times, but something else was hitting Kirishima. Something accurate, powerful, and impossible to see. Kondo still did not know that a second American battleship, Washington, was firing at them from the darkness with perfect radar aim. As Kirishima's condition worsened, Kondo made a decision. The mission must be abandoned. The Japanese force had come to bombard Henderson Field, but that goal was now impossible. If they stayed any longer, they risked losing even more ships. Kondo ordered all ships that could still fight to turn north and retreat at high speed. Washington fired a few more salvos at the retreating Japanese cruisers and destroyers, scoring several hits. But Admiral Lee decided not to chase them. He knew that moving too far north could lead the task force into submarine traps or another Japanese group waiting in the dark. At 11:28 p.m., he ordered Washington to cease fire. The battle was over, at least for the Americans. Kirishima was not so lucky. As the night continued, her damage control crews fought with everything they had. They tried to pump out water from flooded compartments. They tried to cool fires that were spreading along passageways. They tried to restore power to critical systems. But the damage was too great. The hits from Washington had smashed open too many parts of the ship. The flooding kept getting worse. At around 3 a.m., Kirishima's damage control officer reached the final conclusion. The ship could not be saved. The captain ordered the crew to prepare to abandon ship. Destroyers moved in close to carry the survivors off. Sailors climbed down ropes, jumped into the water, or crossed makeshift gangways laid between the ships. At 4:25 a.m., after taking off as many survivors as they could, Japanese destroyers fired torpedoes into Kirishima to sink her quickly. The huge battleship rolled slowly onto her side, her stern dipping into the dark water. First moments later, she slid beneath the surface, taking more than 200 crew members with her. Kirishima's loss meant far more than just one battleship gone. It ended Japan's belief that they owned the night. They had always trusted their night optics and torpedoes, but now they had met a new kind of enemy, a battleship that could see perfectly in the dark. And from this moment on, the Japanese Navy fought with much more fear and caution around Guadalcanal. When USS Washington reached the base at Noumea after the battle, she did not look like a ship that had just fought one of the most important battles of the war. Her hull was clean. Her decks were not burned. Her guns were untouched. There were no holes in her armor. She did not lose a single man. To anyone who saw her from a distance, she looked like a ship coming back from a simple patrol, not a battle that changed the course of the Guadalcanal campaign. South Dakota, on the other hand, told a very different story. She was covered in dents and burns. Her upper works were smashed. Her paint was blackened by fire. She had taken dozens of hits during the fight. Reporters loved the dramatic image of a battleship that had survived heavy punishment. So South Dakota quickly became the ship everyone talked about. Newspapers called her brave. Crews on other ships admired her toughness. Washington's victory was harder to see with the eyes because it came from precision, not damage. But the numbers told the real truth. Washington had fired 75 of her huge 16-inch shells. At least 9 hit Kirishima. Some went straight through the ship and out the other side. Her fire control team handled the battle perfectly. Her radar never failed. Her secondary guns fired fast and steady at Japanese destroyers, and she did all of this without taking a single hit in return. Some officers in the Navy began to say that Washington got lucky, or that she only won because South Dakota drew all the enemy fire. Admiral Lee refused this idea. In his official report, he explained clearly that Washington won because of good tactics, correct use of radar, and skilled gunners. He made it clear that Washington took the position she needed to take, stayed hidden in the dark on purpose, and used her tools the way they were designed to be used. He said the battle showed exactly how fast battleships with radar should fight at night. Even though Washington's performance was amazing, she received very little public credit. She simply went back to work. She guarded carriers in later battles. She bombarded islands in the Marshalls, the Gilberts, and the Marianas. She supported major invasions. She fought through the rest of the war and earned 13 battle stars, which is more than many famous ships received. But she never again faced another battleship in a one-on-one surface fight. The night of November 14, 1942, was her one perfect moment, a moment where she proved that radar, training, and calm leadership could defeat fear, confusion, and darkness. Washington did not return with scars, but she returned with something far more important, a victory that changed how navies would fight forever. After the battle, it took some time for people to understand what Washington had really done. At first, the Navy and the public talked mostly about South Dakota, because her damage was dramatic and easy to show in photos. But when officers and engineers studied the battle reports, they realized that Washington had done something far more important than anyone first understood. She showed that radar and modern fire control were not just helpful tools. They were the future of naval warfare. Before this fight, many commanders believed battles at sea still depended on eyesight, searchlights, and visual spotting. They trusted rangefinders and optical sights more than machines. But Washington's perfect performance in the dark proved that a battleship could aim and hit targets using only radar. No searchlights, no bright flashes, no guessing, just clean, steady information fed straight into her fire control computers. Her accuracy at night shocked even American officers who had believed in radar. At the Naval War College, instructors studied Washington's engagement second by second. They taught new officers how her radar operators tracked targets. They showed how the stable vertical system kept the guns level during turns. They used the battle as an example of how a modern ship should fight at night. Washington became a case study for the entire U.S. Navy. Engineers also took notes. When they designed and improved the Iowa-class battleships, the most advanced American battleships ever built, they added upgrades based on Washington's success. They improved radar displays, strengthened plotting rooms, and made fire control even smoother. Many of these upgrades came directly from what Washington proved she could do in real combat. Even Japanese officers later admitted that this battle forced them to change how they thought. They had always believed they ruled the night because of their excellent optics and training. But Washington showed them something they never expected: an enemy battleship that could stay completely invisible and still land hit after hit with incredible accuracy. Japanese commanders said this made them far more cautious in later night battles. They no longer felt confident sending big ships into narrow waters after dark. Washington's victory also changed the mood of the U.S. Navy. Before this fight, many American sailors felt fear when entering night battles in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese had beaten them at night again and again. But after Washington sank Kirishima, that fear began to fade. Sailors gained confidence in radar, and in the new fast battleships, they now believed that with the right training and equipment, they could win at night too. In the end, Washington's 13 minutes of near-perfect gunnery did more than sink a battleship. They changed how the Navy trained, how ships were built, and how battles were fought for the rest of the war. Washington showed that technology, when used the right way, could completely change the rules of naval combat. USS Washington proved everything she needed to prove in only 13 minutes. She sank a modern Japanese battleship at night, took no hits in return, and showed that radar could change sea combat forever. But even with all she achieved, she never became a famous ship. After the Guadalcanal campaign, Washington kept working quietly. She protected carriers, bombarded islands, and fought through major operations across the Pacific. She earned 13 battle stars, a number that many well-known ships never reached. But she was never again given a chance to fight a surface battle like the one she mastered off Guadalcanal. When the war ended, Washington did not become a museum or memorial. She was taken out of service in 1947 and eventually sold for scrap in 1961. By 1962, the ship that had delivered one of the most perfect gunnery performances in American history was gone. Only small artifacts, photographs, and the memories of her crew remained. The sailors who served on her never forgot what she did. Many of them said the same thing years later. Washington fought the way she was designed to fight. She used radar, training, and calm control to defeat a strong enemy in the dark. She proved the value of modern systems and set the standard for how future battleships would fight. Even if most people don't know her name today, her victory changed the course of naval warfare. Washington entered the night as the second ship of her class. She left it as the battleship that rewrote the rules.